Hello, today is Tuesday, July 12th, 2022. I'm Joe Schmidt from TC2, and this is Staying Connected. It's no doubt that record inflation is having some impact on everyone's personal lives, and it's also impacting the companies where you work. On today's podcast, we're going to explore how inflation is impacting your ICT budget. What we're seeing is that telecom and other IT companies are working really hard to make their inflation problems your inflation problems. I'm here with my colleagues and buddies, Larry York, who is TC2's executive director, and Brent Knight, a senior consultant at TC2. These two guys have a lot to say about this topic because they've seen the playbook that vendors use to pass on costs to their customers. Larry and Brent are going to provide some advice on how you can best protect your organization from service providers pushing their costs on to you in unexpected ways. Hey, Larry and Brent, thanks for joining me today.
Hey, Joe. It's good to be here today. Thanks for having us.
Yes, always good to be back with both of you. Looking forward to it.
All right, so Brent, talk a bit about what you're seeing in the marketplace with telecom and IT contracts regarding inflation.
Sure, Joe. Let me paint a picture of the inflation concern for enterprises. What we know of telecom providers is that they live in a competitive marketplace where cost compression is a real part of their life. And what I mean by cost compression is vendors compete in this space by inventing new products and services and by constantly attempting to optimize their cost structure. And by optimize, I mean increase their margins and their revenues and find ways to get that money from their customers' pockets into their own. Where inflation becomes a major disruptor on the cost side of vendors, all of a sudden, they're facing increased input costs that they may not have planned for. When they feel this economic pain, their first instinct is to find ways or invent new ones to pass that pain on to you, their customer.
That sounds pretty ominous, Brent. So, Larry, what are you seeing from the telecom and IT providers?
Yes, Joe, it's a very timely session and had a few very recent experiences with a number of the global providers that brought to light the types of changes that we're seeing. And just a few of those are things like Verizon's new economic adjustment charge, Verizon's give to get, which has been around for a while, but they're becoming more difficult and unreasonable in the negotiations of that. Things like we used to do extensions and you would see on an annual extension, maybe you could do plus or minus 10%. Now we're seeing 6 and 8% reductions for 2 and 3 year deals. So they're definitely negotiating more firmly. Also, when it comes to contract structures and you're looking at the negotiating of contract renewals, they're focused on taking back your contract flexibility by things like, term commitments have become pretty commonplace for well-negotiated deals. We now consistently see with all of the suppliers trying to change those term commitments back to annual commitments. We also see increasing the commitment percentages. When it comes to your 12-month extensions at the end of your deal, kind of your get out of jail card safety pass, those are typically structured so that at the customer's sole discretion, you have 12-month extension. We're consistently seeing all the suppliers remove that and take that to a mutual agreement for that extension to take place. We also see things like even eliminating the back-end transition clauses, which give you the flexibility. And then when it comes to some of the technologies, AT&T, for instance, and others, but AT&T seems to be on a very aggressive path for this. The things like POTS lines and other TDM-based services, they're pushing immediate rate increases. And these rate increases are not just 20, 30%. These are 5 and 6 times higher that become effective the day you sign your new deal. So things like that. And then we've even seen some suppliers proposing only on-net services in RFP responses where they're really focused on just providing those services where they have the highest margins.
Hey, that first item you mentioned, the Verizon economic adjustment charge, we actually did a podcast not too long ago on that. And that basically lets Verizon increase everyone's prices because, they say so. And, that's just a joke. So, Larry, what can customers do about those other items that you just mentioned?
It's a great question, Joe. And I think when you hear a lot of those items, some of the new nomenclatures make them new introductions into the negotiating tact of suppliers. But many of the things I mentioned are not new. It's just that they're becoming much more rigid. And it's becoming a much more consistent pattern where we're seeing these things. So what it really requires is a very disciplined approach, Joe. I mean, more than ever, when you're engaging with your suppliers, that contract flexibility is more important today based on the uncertain times we're in with inflation, right? It's imperative for organizations to protect that flexibility that you've negotiated for so hard in the past and been able to bring into your agreements. And I would say, once you give up that contract flexibility in today's environment, you won't get that back until you do a full-blown RFP. And then, even then, it's going to be a difficult road.
All right. Sounds like matters are indeed getting dicey out there, and I think they're trending in the wrong direction for enterprises. Okay, Brent, I'm curious, what sort of specific steps can enterprises take to mitigate or even stop these issues?
So the first thing enterprises need to do is make sure that they know their contractual rights and what obligations under that contract that your providers have to you. You need to know what resources are contractually committed to you from your provider. Providers will always right size, and I'm using air quotes here, their support models. And if you don't have the resources you're expecting to support you identified in your contract, these resources can easily disappear as part of a service provider's attempt to cut cost. This is why we always stress making sure you have documented in your contract what resources a provider is going to provide and whether they're dedicated or designated resources and what percentage of each resource is committed to you. Next, you need to know your SLAs. As providers scale back resources to cut cost, service performance can be in jeopardy. This is why, again, we always try to negotiate SLAs very hard. Having teeth in your SLAs and administering them is critical when vendors try to cut costs by cutting corners. Next, don't let providers try and shift more of their responsibilities over to you. You'll see and hear a lot more about self-help portals and all the great things you can do for yourself. The key for many providers here is they want to take items that they've supported for you in the past and shift those duties onto you. Again, if you've negotiated contract support and account team support in your agreement, don't let that get shortchanged. Also, be wary of suppliers trying to add new COLA, cost of living adjustments, language to your contracts. This is not a door that you want to let them open. However, we have many managed services contracts. We do often see COLA language due to the employee and contractor resources involved with delivering those services. I'm sure if you have one of these in your contract, it's very likely that your service provider will be knocking on your door soon to discuss it. Make sure if you have one of these that you have a trusted and reasonable data source that both parties agree to, and that whatever COLA increases are allowed, follow the agreed upon terms very closely. And lastly, watch and monitor your invoices carefully. Service providers are notorious for adding new service charges to your invoices that you're not paying attention to. You can build up for months before someone identifies them.
Okay, thanks for that, Brent. Hey, Larry, is there anything else that enterprises should be doing to protect themselves and I guess be on the lookout?
Joe, there are a number of things. I would say when it comes to utilizing your benchmarking and rate review clauses, you need to come prepared, right? You need to have very strong data that supports your position, build a solid business case, because you know the telecom providers are going to have their data and they're going to be able to present a solid business case that supports their position. Another item would be start your sole source renegotiations early enough. Make sure you leave enough time that if you're not happy with the outcome of your sole source negotiation, that you have the option to then turn around and take that business to market. Enterprises should keep the competitive tensions as part of the discussions with incumbents. Sole source negotiations have always been more challenging, but they'll definitely be difficult in today's economic environment. And also keep in mind, when you're looking at RFPing your services, you don't necessarily have to RFP everything. You can look at RFPing towers of business, geographic regions of business, or smaller pieces in a way that it makes sense for your business model.
Okay, good stuff. Thank you, Larry. Thank you as well, Brent. If you need some help getting your ICT costs under control, or maybe you have other ICT needs, Feel free to contact Larry, Brent, me, or any of our LB3 and TC2 colleagues by giving us a call or dropping us an email. You can also stay up to date by subscribing to these Staying Connected podcasts, by checking out our websites, and by following us on LinkedIn.